In January 1945, a P-47 Thunderbolt from the United States 8th Air Force began a climb over the Ardennes. Its pilot noticed the manifold pressure needle jammed past 70 inches of mercury, a mark no engine of its type was meant to reach. Below, the turbo spun faster than 20,000 revolutions per minute, heat climbing toward 480 degrees Fahrenheit. The sound was wrong, a growl instead of a hum, yet the altitude kept rising. At 25,000 feet, the aircraft still gained 4,500 feet per minute. German radar tracked a single contact climbing faster than the Me-262 jets, then patrolling the sector. No escort fighter was expected to reach that height. To controllers, it looked impossible. The pilot leveled off above 31,000 feet. The engine shook, fuel flow unsteady, exhaust rings glowing white. He cut power before detonation could tear the cylinders apart. The flight report would later note the fault without cause or repair order. The system had failed, and yet it had worked. The broken engine had just rewritten the ceiling of the piston age. By late 1944, the air war above Europe had tilted toward the unknown. The Luftwaffe's Me-262 and R-234 streaked across bomber formations at speeds that no piston aircraft could match. Their climbs were near vertical flashes, thin trails cutting through the contrails of the slower Allied escorts. For the first time since 1940, altitude no longer belonged to the Allies. The United States Army Air Forces still relied on the P-47 Thunderbolt, massive, radial-engined, and rugged. Its R-2800 engine gave power through brute pressure, not finesse. Inside its belly, a turbo-supercharger turned exhaust heat into thrust. Its pipes coiled like steel arteries. At 30,000 feet, the system kept the fighter alive, but the weight was punishing. The Me-262 could climb twice as fast and vanish above it. German pilots called the Thunderbolt the Heavy Jug, a plane that would fight gravity longer than it fought them. Factories in Evansville and Farmingdale worked without pause. Each day, hundreds of new Thunderbolts rolled out, their engines tested at 56 inches manifold pressure, their turbo housings sealed with chalk signatures. Command believed that quantity would beat innovation. Statistics said that reliability, not speed, would win. But mathematics on paper could not measure the thin air over the Ruhr. In the dispersal huts of the 56th Fighter Group, the pilots argued about altitude. Bombers now crossed Germany at 28,000 feet, while the new jets struck from higher still. An escort that lagged even a minute could not protect the lead boxes. Every climb became a race against time and engine limits. Captain Robert H. Carter had a habit of listening to machines more than to orders. Trained as a maintenance officer before combat duty, he knew how the regulator cables felt when frost stiffened the sheathing. On cold mornings, when he advanced the throttle, the manifold gauge jumped before the wastegate caught up. The turbo surged, roared, then steadied. Others called it a scare. He called it a clue. Carter began to time the spikes, logging fuel flow and climb intervals after each sortie. The pattern held. Whenever the regulator hesitated, the aircraft rose faster than the charts predicted. Temperatures stayed high, but within range. Mechanics replaced worn cables. He asked them to leave his untouched. A fault, he suspected, could be managed if measured. By December 1944, his logbook carried a note in the margin: regulator delay power gain. That single line joined physics with chance. He proposed a controlled climb to the squadron engineering officer, who dismissed it as reckless. Engines were expensive, pilots were harder to replace. The test was denied, then quietly scheduled as a functional check flight. When the winter storm broke and the air cleared, Carter prepared his Thunderbolt for the climb. The regulator cable stayed worn, the wastegate unadjusted. The cockpit gauges waited, steady in the cold. No one expected anything but a failed test. The sky would prove otherwise. The next descent would turn a malfunction into a new law of altitude. The R-2800 Double Wasp was less an engine than a machine ecosystem. 18 cylinders in two tight rows drove a forged crankshaft that absorbed 2,400 pounds per square inch of internal pressure. At military power, it produced 2,300 horsepower at 2,700 revolutions per minute. Yet its true strength lay behind the firewall, in the labyrinth of ducts that carried exhaust to the turbo-supercharger buried deep in the fuselage. The system made the Thunderbolt breathe where other aircraft suffocated. Exhaust gases spun a turbine wheel that reached 18,000 revolutions per minute. The turbine turned a compressor, feeding pressurized air through an intercooler back into the carburetor. At altitude, the turbine spun faster as air thinned, keeping manifold pressure constant beyond 25,000 feet. Temperature stability was maintained only if every valve, linkage, and regulator responded within fractions of a second. To prevent disaster, engineers built an automatic boost control unit, a diaphragm that balanced pressure by opening a wastegate whenever the manifold exceeded 56 inches of mercury. It was elegant, safe, and slow. Factory reports from Wright Field confirmed the margin. During 1943 endurance runs, climb rate averaged 2,600 feet per minute to 25,000 feet at discharge temperatures near 460 degrees Fahrenheit. Each component worked inside a closed formula of efficiency and restraint. Power was designed, not guessed. But mechanical formulas faltered in winter. Cold thickened the oil film on the regulator cable, creating a half-second lag before the wastegate responded. In that brief pause, the turbine oversped and manifold pressure leapt into forbidden territory. Most pilots throttled back instantly. Captain Carter did not. He studied the regulator linkage on the ground and saw wear invisible to casual inspection. The brass eyelet had stretched into an oval, adding slack. When he advanced throttle, the wastegate closed a fraction too late. Exhaust surged. The turbo accelerated beyond control for a moment before equilibrium returned. The fault was repeatable, and it produced measurable gain. He logged each spike with exactitude: time, pressure, fuel flow, and climb interval. On his next maintenance flight, manifold pressure peaked at 71 inches. Turbo speed touched 20,000 revolutions per minute. Cylinder head temperature reached 500 degrees Fahrenheit, then fell as airflow increased. Climb rate jumped from 2,600 to 3,800 feet per minute. No misfire followed. The aftercooler, chilled by dense air, dispersed the excess heat before it damaged the cylinders. A fault had become equilibrium. Ground crews refused to believe it. No P-47 could exceed its rated limit without detonation. But Carter's engine returned unscathed. Inspection showed clean plugs, normal oil color, and a thin blue heat tint on the turbine housing. The evidence was plain: a perfect accident. Where design sought safety, entropy had found efficiency. Through December, he repeated the trial. Each flight lasted 10 minutes longer, each climb steeper. Every reading fell within tolerance, once throttle reduced. He began calling it the broken climb mode. Pilots in nearby squadrons heard the rumor: a Thunderbolt that climbed like a twin-engine interceptor. The tone of disbelief faded after they saw his altimeter records. When the squadron's engineering officer reviewed the data, the conclusion was cautious. Transient regulator lag yields unapproved performance increase. No directive followed. Production schedules left no room for redesign, and the front demanded sorties, not theory. The note was filed and forgotten. Carter was cleared for one more systems flight before replacement parts arrived. On a freezing morning near year's end, he rolled from Boxted's runway with the old regulator intact. Air temperature was minus 15 degrees Celsius. Throttle advanced. The turbo roared. Manifold pressure crossed 60, then 70 inches. The aircraft lifted before the end of the strip. Climb instruments blurred under vibration, but the gauges held. At 10,000 feet, oil temperature steadied. At 15, the turbo shriek merged into the wind. At 25,000, the climb clock showed 6 minutes, half the charted time. He leveled briefly. No detonation, no failure, just a new constant hum where strain should have been. The regulator's delay, balanced by the dense cold and efficient aftercooler, had created a narrow thermal symmetry. Exhaust pressure, turbine speed, and temperature met at a point that textbooks had missed. The Thunderbolt, for a moment, operated beyond its own specification without harm. When he landed, technicians disassembled the cowling, expecting wreckage. They found none. The turbine blades showed faint discoloration, but no cracks. The bearings turned freely. Only the regulator cable told the story, its sheath frayed, its core polished bright from motion. It had delayed by precisely the right fraction of time. For the first time, performance exceeded prediction by accident rather than intention. A man and a machine had crossed into the thin space between control and chaos and discovered that it could hold. The climb data from that morning entered the maintenance log as routine. Engine check flight, regulator pending replacement. No further comment. Yet within those few lines, the limits of piston design had quietly shifted. The laws of altitude had been rewritten, not by innovation, but by wear. Dawn broke over Boxted with frost welded to metal. The P-47D sat nose into the wind, chalk slashes on its cowling to track exhaust color. Carter strapped in, set mixture to rich, and left the regulator untouched. The engine caught, stumbled, then settled into a dense metallic growl. He advanced throttle until the cockpit shook like a held spring. The manifold needle leapt past the red band and did not return. Wastegate delay turned exhaust into force. The turbo spooled with a high, dry whistle that slipped into the wind. Cylinder head temperature rose fast, then checked. Oil pressure held firm. He released the brakes. The Thunderbolt ran the frozen strip, lifted early, and climbed as if it had shed weight. Ground control started a clock. At 60 seconds, the aircraft was through 6,000 feet. At 2 minutes, it crossed 12,000. At 5, it was already above 21,000. The line on the board rose too steep to chart. Radios fell quiet while the tower watched a propeller fighter do the work of a jet. Carter kept the nose high and the hand steady. The air cleared into hard blue. At 23,000 feet, the engine note sharpened. At 25,000, the climb still felt linear, not strained. He nudged the throttle a fraction forward, held for a count, then eased it back. The system balanced. The aircraft kept rising. At 29,000 feet, he leveled for a moment to read the panel without vibration. Gauges steadied. Turbo discharge temperature hovered near 480 degrees Fahrenheit. Fuel flow stayed heavy but clean. The manifold needle sat past its mark like a stuck compass. Nothing in training had prepared him for a climb that refused to sag. Below, mechanics ringed the dispersal hut windows. They waited for the sound that meant detonation and recovery. The sound never came. They marked times on a pad and argued about density, altitude, and cable slack. One of them pointed at the sky and said the word that almost never belonged to a Thunderbolt. He said higher. German radar farther east logged a thin contact that refused prediction. Altitude increments arrived faster than the plotting officer could write. A controller told a patrol to investigate. No order was given to engage. The assumption was simple. Any propeller fighter at that height would fall away on its own. Carter pushed through 31,000 feet and held. The engine's rough band faded into a clean hum. The airframe trembled on the edge of thin air, but controls stayed honest. He made a short turn, rolled back to wings level, and watched the altimeter creep. The horizon looked sharpened by cold. The sky was empty. He began a shallow descent to keep temperatures in check. The overboost had done its work. The engine wanted relief. He stepped down in slow arcs and returned to the circuit with power low and speed high. The landing felt routine. The rollout did not. Mechanics were already running. The cowl came off before the propeller stopped windmilling. Plugs came out clean. Oil showed no metal. Bearings spun free under a fingertip. The turbine blades wore a faint blue tint along the edges, not a burn. The regulator cable, when pulled, showed the truth. The sheath was frayed to a shine. The core dragged in its guide, late by a beat that mattered. On a clipboard, the crew chief wrote the numbers that did not fit policy. Climb time to 25,000 feet under 6 minutes. Power maintained at altitude beyond expected stability. No detonation recorded. Visual trace of heat at the turbine, no deformation measured. He signed his name under a line that read, "Anomaly observed." Carter filed the flight as a check. He wrote short sentences. He did not add the word impossible. He noted throttle behavior and the duration of the delay. He added an instruction to himself on the last line. Advance quickly, then reduce. Hold the rise. Let the machine catch up. In the mess, pilots asked for details he would not invent. He told them he had pushed, waited, and felt the aircraft carry him up. He said the system had held with room to spare. He said he would try again while the weather stayed cold. He did not call it a trick. He called it a rhythm. The squadron engineering officer read the log and asked for restraint. Replacement parts were en route. The aircraft should be kept within limits until the cable could be changed. Carter nodded. He knew what the paper required. He also knew what the sky had shown. Limits drawn for safety could bend, briefly, under control. Across the next days, ground crews measured linkages on adjacent aircraft. Several showed early wear. None matched the slop of Carter's line. Mechanics wrote maintenance due tags and shook their heads. Pilots stopped by the line and looked at the cowls without touching them, as if the metal could explain itself. A quiet experiment began without orders. Climbs were started earlier. Throttle movements were made with intent. Pilots watched the manifold needle to see if it jumped shy, then crossed late. Most aircraft did what the manual promised and nothing else. A few twitched past the mark, then fell back. Only one held a climb that changed shape. The controller at Boxted adjusted rendezvous timing with a pencil and a shrug. Flights from the field began arriving at altitude sooner than planned. The bomber stream did not wait as often. Escorts edged higher along the route. No one wrote a memo. The plan simply started working better. Carter flew another high climb in hard air. He kept each burst short to avoid heat stacking. The rule had become part of muscle memory. Push, count, reduce, hold. The sequence fed a balance that should not have existed. Each adjustment was a small rescue from failure. Back on the ground, the crew checked the turbine again. No cracks, no wobble. Exhaust streaking along the cowling deepened a shade, and the heat tint sharpened at the vanes. The regulator looked worse. A replacement label sat on a bench, unopened. The chief left it there and told Carter to keep his next climb short. A narrow line had formed between useful and unwise. The men who touched the machines knew it without language. They worked in that line because the war ran on minutes, not theories. Every minute saved in the climb put guns and eyes over the bombers sooner. The calculation did not need a blackboard. The report that left Boxted used careful phrasing. Transient overboost recorded under cold weather operation. No immediate damage observed. Performance increase noted at altitude. Recommend controlled recheck before component replacement. It reached hands that understood a field unit asking for time. Time was scarce. The answer did not come. At night, frost turned the flight line white. Metal creaked as it cooled. The aircraft that had risen beyond its chart stood with its cowl patched and its gauges dark. The air around it felt thinner in memory than it had in flight. The men who had watched the climb tried not to believe what they had seen. Belief was not required. The numbers were enough. Morning would bring routes and altitudes and fuel load briefs. It would bring weather that made density a weapon. It would bring a decision that no order had written. Keep the delay, use it once more, then accept the bill when the part arrived. The machine had given them a margin. They intended to spend it. Carter slept because pilots must. He woke before light and walked to the line with the first crew. He ran a hand along the cowling. The chalk marks were still there, smeared by cold hands. He climbed in, closed the canopy, and listened to the engine become itself. The sky waited with a silence that gathers before a climb. He nodded to the chief. The signal came back. Go. He would take the aircraft to altitude again. He would keep the burst short. He would ride the balance until the line turned against him. The machine would tell him when to stop. The gauges would become a kind of map. The climb would be written in seconds and feet, not opinion. This was how an avalanche begins in machinery, not with spectacle, but with a quiet change in rate that no one can ignore. A fighter designed to reach high had found a way to rise higher. The cause was a delay. The effect was altitude. The next missions would measure what that meant. 2 days later, weather cleared over the North Sea. Clouds broke into narrow lanes, sunlight glinting on contrails. Bomber groups formed at 28,000 feet, turning east toward the Ruhr. Escort orders raised climb altitude by 1,000 feet. Carter's Thunderbolt rolled last from Boxted's frozen runway, the regulator still uncorrected. The first miles of ascent came easier than any chart allowed. By the Dutch coast, he was already high above formation level. Manifold pressure stood pinned beyond the red arc, turbine speed 22,000 revolutions per minute. The air was brittle, perfect for the fault to work. Ground radar plotted the climb with mild disbelief, propeller fighter at 30,000, climbing. German controllers at Kassel saw the trace next. They sent up a pair of Me-262s to investigate. The jets rose from cloud tops like knives, expecting a slow-moving escort to fall beneath them. When Carter saw their vapor trails, he increased throttle with one quick stroke, beating the regulator by a heartbeat. The engine surged clean, the airframe lifted, and altitude opened between them. At 32,000 feet, he leveled, conserving temperature. Turbo discharge read 485 degrees Fahrenheit, oil pressure 108 pounds per square inch, fuel flow 290 gallons per hour. Everything sat at the edge of tolerance, but nothing failed. The Thunderbolt, heavier than both jets combined, owned the upper air for the first time. The Me-262s flattened out below, losing energy in their turn. Carter rolled to intercept. He could not match their speed, but position mattered more than power. The first jet dived, missing the bomber column entirely. The second tried to climb back through his level. It stalled before closing the gap. Carter fired a short burst to break its line, then resumed climb. The sky belonged to piston power for another minute. In the bomber debrief later that day, crews wrote simple words: fighter cover present at altitude. No mention of a pilot or a defect. The war recorded results, not causes. At Duxford that same week, engineers replicated his climb with sensors attached to the turbo casing and aftercooler outlet. The pilot followed Carter's notes. Advance throttle fast, hold 15 seconds, reduce. Telemetry confirmed 32% improvement in climb rate from 10 to 22,000 feet. Manifold pressure peaked at 71 inches, plus or minus 1. Exhaust temperature reached 600 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 seconds before cooling. The result entered the record as temporary controlled exceedance. Wright Field reviewed the data and issued a cautious note. It neither endorsed nor banned the practice. Transient regulator variance may occur under low temperature conditions. Pilots should monitor heat and avoid prolonged exposure. The language said everything without admitting anything. The delay remained officially invisible. Carter refined his rhythm with precision. Push, count, reduce, hold. A burst of overboost for 15 seconds, then cruise for 20. The method turned the fault into a repeatable sequence. Too short, and the wastegate caught up. Too long, and temperature climbed into detonation risk. He kept the margin within control. One mission nearly erased it. Returning from Germany, he noticed rising vibration through the throttle quadrant. Icing had formed on the intercooler screens. Turbo discharge temperature spiked to 510 degrees Fahrenheit. He cut power early, descended in a long glide, and landed with fuel nearly gone. Mechanics broke the ice loose with mallets, their breath hanging white. The entry in the log was blunt. Climb maintained, intake icing critical. Rumors spread faster than cables. Units at Debden and Leiston tested throttle technique in cold climbs. Some gained minor increases, others found nothing. None matched the precision of Carter's wear pattern. The effect needed that specific cable slack, that precise cold density. The anomaly was mechanical, not mystical. The Luftwaffe adjusted tactics. Me-262s staged from deeper bases, trading climb for fuel reserve. They attacked in dives, not ascents. Their brief superiority in altitude was gone. Allied formations flew higher, and interception curves no longer worked. The difference of one broken regulator rewrote the geometry of the last winter battles. By March, Engineering Command intervened. Carter's aircraft was grounded for inspection. The regulator cable came out gleaming, worn through the sheath, its brass arm hammered by motion. Turbo bearings showed a blue tint, but no cracks. Metallurgists called it incipient fatigue. The replacement arrived 2 days later. Once installed, the fault disappeared. The next climb followed the book: safe, predictable, ordinary. The miracle was over. Before the damaged parts left the station, a courier tagged them for analysis at Wright Field. Inside the laboratory, technicians measured metal hardness and plotted delay curves. They discovered the time gap that had made everything possible: 0.4 seconds between command and response. Under cold oil, that delay gave the turbine a burst of unregulated speed, just long enough to add altitude without overheat. It was physics written in wear. Field reports continued to show improved climbs for several weeks, even after repairs. The new altitude profiles became standard procedure, inherited from a phenomenon already fading. No one linked them back to a single pilot. The paperwork listed environmental performance increase. Spring ended the pattern. Warmer air thickened oil viscosity. The regulators responded faster. The anomaly vanished on its own. The squadron returned to scheduled climbs, slower and safer. The sky remained theirs, but the margin of wonder was gone. Carter flew on with the new equipment. Each takeoff felt heavier, the needle obedient, the power tamed. He knew the rhythm by memory, the missing lag, the rising tone that no longer came. Once, at altitude, he tried a quick throttle burst out of habit. The manifold rose to its limit and stopped. The silence afterward felt final. The part that had failed was replaced. The story that it created stayed unspoken. Only the data crossed the Atlantic, where engineers traced new rules from its curve. In time, those rules shaped the first jet turbine tests. For now, in the thin air of early 1945, one P-47 had climbed beyond every measured expectation. A broken delay in a single regulator had turned gravity itself into a variable. The pilot did not call it a discovery. He called it a day's work and wrote what the numbers said. Altitude achieved, 33,000 feet. Time to climb, 6 minutes flat. Condition of engine, satisfactory. It was enough. By February 1945, the data from Boxted had reached Wright Field. Engineers cleared a hangar bay and laid Carter's engine on a bench of white steel. Each cylinder head bore scorch rings, faint and even, a signature of stress just below failure. Under magnification, the turbine blades showed ripple lines where metal had stretched by heat. The shaft bearings had worn to a perfect oval. Nothing had fractured. Nothing remained within tolerance. The technicians wrote the numbers in silence. Maximum recorded manifold pressure, 72 inches, mercury, plus or minus 2. Turbo speed, 22,000 revolutions per minute. Cylinder head temperature, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Stable for 6 minutes. The summary line carried both praise and warning. Performance exceptional, durability unacceptable. They ran test cells to verify it. On the third overboost cycle, a similar R2800 shed a turbine blade at 580 degrees. The casing held. The engine did not. The analysts marked a limit. Safe transient overboost below 70 inches for no longer than 20 seconds. Beyond that, detonation probability doubled every 5 seconds. The rule was written, not announced. Carter was flown to the field to brief the engineers who had built the machine he had broken. He listened while charts showed climb rate against wear. The line rose like a rocket and fell like a heart monitor. The math was plain. For every 20% gained in power, service life dropped by 2/3. The miracle had borrowed time. Outside the meeting, the language grew simpler. The trick worked. Once. The next time it would destroy the turbo. He signed the test acknowledgement and returned to his unit with orders to stand down. No reprimand followed. The system had already learned what it needed. At Boxted, other Thunderbolts showed the same symptoms. Turbo lags in freezing air produced short, violent surges. One aircraft returned with smoke in the tailpipe. Another glided to a dead-stick landing when the turbine locked solid. Mechanics logged regulator irregularity. Pilots called it the jump. Each still chased the altitude the first climb had reached. Field reports revealed a split pattern, some engines flawless, others failing. Pratt and Whitney investigators traced the difference to wear depth on the linkage pivot. A tolerance of 1/16 inch made the margin between burst and balance. Wartime assembly lines could not guarantee that precision. Every aircraft carried its own odds. Meanwhile, the data continued to shape doctrine. Wright Field issued a technical note: transient pressure rise acceptable within 20-second limit if temperature stable below 500 degrees. The phrase appeared in no pilot manual, yet word reached the flight line. Crews began timing throttle bursts with wristwatches. The edge between discipline and destruction narrowed to seconds. Carter's machine flew one last sortie in early March. The regulator finally seized mid-climb, freezing the wastegate closed. The turbo howled past 24,000 revolutions before the pilot cut mixture and glided into a muddy English field. He walked away. The engine arrived back at Wright Field inside a wooden crate, its blades fused like poured glass. Metallurgists logged the temperature as beyond scale. The failure confirmed the threshold. From that point, the overboost technique ended, at least officially. Yet its influence persisted. Reports from France, Belgium, and Italy noted improved high-altitude performance among winter-based squadrons. Commanders did not ask why. Mission results were enough. The balance between gain and cost became the quiet law of 1945. Each climb faster than regulation meant one engine closer to overhaul. Spare parts vanished faster than orders could replace them. The war consumed machinery at a pace no peacetime ledger could describe. By April, the Me-262 threat had faded. German jet sorties dropped to a handful per day, limited by fuel and runway damage. Altitude duels turned into routine patrols. The Thunderbolt's edge, once stolen from a fault, no longer mattered. But for a brief winter, it had forced the jet age to share the sky. At Wright Field, engineers compared the accident to their jet turbine prototypes. The lesson was immediate. Every engine had a grace window between control and destruction. Measured overspeed could be exploited if cooling and timing were exact. The data from Carter's flights became the baseline for the first controlled overspeed tests on the J-35 turbine. In technical lineage, the broken regulator stood at the root of modern power management. Carter transferred to an instructor role. He flew the newer M-Series Thunderbolt, its regulator redesigned with hydraulic assist that reacted in half the time. It climbed smoothly, safely, and predictably. He called it lifeless. Students saw stability. He heard the absence of danger that had once made the aircraft alive. The original turbo remained at Wright Field for study. Under laboratory light, the alloy shimmered violet from heat stain. Microscopes traced grain deformation through every vein. A note in the margin of the final report read, "Delayed feedback phenomena may offer insight for jet transition control." The language was as cold as the metal. When the war ended, the file labeled Boxted Climb Anomaly contained 20 pages. One graph showed the entire story, an abrupt rise, a plateau, and a sharp decline. Beneath it, a single line of commentary. Power increase proportional to degradation rate. It meant the machine had reached perfection through damage, the oldest truth in engineering. Strength came from tolerance found only once, at the instant before failure. The fault had shown how far design could stretch before it snapped. Carter read the report years later in an archive. He said the numbers were right. He said the climb had felt inevitable, not reckless. He said that, for those few minutes, the Thunderbolt seemed to forget it was heavy. The engineers called it a transient anomaly. The pilots called it luck. History called it transition. Between the piston and the jet stood a single flight where both eras met, and the boundary held just long enough to be measured. When the last P-47 engine was shut down at Wright Field, A mechanic noted the idle speed with a pencil and walked away. The hangar echoed once, then settled. The turbine that had once outrun a jet cooled in silence. The numbers remained. They were the final voice of a machine that had climbed higher than its design, carrying every limit with it. The age of pistons had ended, but its last ascent had written the first rule of the turbines that followed. When the war closed its ledgers, the worn regulator from Boxted lay wrapped in oiled paper at Wright Field. It was catalogued as a failed part from a fighter already passing into history. Yet the figures it produced traveled farther than the metal. Engineers copied climb rates, pressure spikes, and temperature curves into new binders. A quiet phrase appeared in test notes for the first post-war studies of turbine control. Delayed feedback over boost became a term, then a baseline. In 1946, Pratt Whitney reopened the R2800 file for peacetime service. Among the revision sheets sat a line that pointed back to Boxted. Field anomaly, transient over boost observed in cold conditions. The corrective step was simple and decisive. A faster wastegate actuator, stiffer linkage geometry, and a service note to inspect cable wear before winter. Prevention acknowledged the phenomenon by removing it from the field. Jet programs borrowed more than caution. At Wright Field, teams shaping the J-35 and J-47 studied short-period overspeed and thermal soakback using Carter's numbers as entry points. The concept of a grace window took form, a measured interval where a turbine could tolerate stress without collapse. What a radial discovered by accident, a jet would adopt by design. Manuals began to describe limits as time as well as temperature. Carter's role remained a footnote. His name surfaced once in a verification line, then disappeared into routine. He left the service in 1946 and worked in a civilian shop that repaired industrial compressors. When asked later, he said the climb felt like the moment a heavy door lifts from its hinges. The machine carried itself for a few minutes, then asked for its price. His description matched the data with plain words. Across the closed airfields of Germany, captured logs told a parallel story. The Me-262 had offered speed and height, but burned itself thin. Engines reached from 10 to 25 hours before overhaul, bearings scuffed, blades warped, and seals cooked. The boundary between control and failure was narrow on both sides of the war. Progress had exposed the same curve in different metal. By 1947, the P-47 stood at the edge of service. Units shifted to jet trainers and early operational squadrons. Manuals for surviving Thunderbolts tightened language around boost. 52 inches, maximum continuous. Transients discouraged. The wartime latitude closed. Pilots training on the type learned climbs by the book and never saw an altimeter rise faster than the chart. The extraordinary became a story the aircraft itself could no longer repeat. Back in the laboratory, technicians kept Carter's turbo casing on a reference rack. Heat tint along the vanes glowed faint blue under lamplight, a ringed pattern that matched the stain of early jet blades after short overspeed tests. A note in the margin compared colors and recorded the same curve of recovery. Temperature rose into danger, then fell within seconds, as flow returned to balance. The observation was clinical, but it carried continuity across eras. The archival narrative remained sparse because test language is built to erase drama. A single line in a February log held everything essential. P-47D, manifold 72 inches, climb rate 4,500 feet per minute at 25,000 feet. No exclamation followed because numbers do not argue. They sit until someone needs them. When the jet age asked for first principles, the answers included one climb from a piston fighter in winter. The lesson that survived was neither romance nor cautionary tale. It was a rule about margins. Systems will allow a narrow passage between efficiency and failure, and that passage can hold if time and cooling are managed. The climb at Boxted traced that passage with a worn cable and cold air. The part failed later, but the data did not. It fed the next generation of engines that would not need wastegates at all. In museums, a Thunderbolt rests under bright lights, heavy and complete, its cowling closed. Visitors read placards about range, payload, and toughness. The story of the climb is not printed there. It lives where technicians study delay curves, where pilots learn to treat limits as durations, and where engineers accept that discovery sometimes arrives as a controlled mistake. For a few minutes in 1945, the piston age reached forward and touched the future that replaced it. By the late 1940s, jets filled the same skies that propellers once owned. The Thunderbolt, now parked under hangar lights, had become a monument to the end of one physics and the beginning of another. Visitors saw strength and size. Few understood that its greatest moment came from imperfection. In the Wright Field archives, a single log entry kept the event alive. P-47D, manifold pressure 72 inches, altitude 31,000 feet, climb rate 4,500 feet per minute. No adjectives followed. The record did not ask for belief, only accuracy. For the engineers who read it years later, the climb marked the hinge between combustion and compression, between control and chaos. For Carter, it had been a routine test that refused to behave. When he spoke of it, he said the machine had simply found balance where none should exist. The Thunderbolt's last act was a paradox. A broken regulator that let a piston fighter reach higher than a jet. Progress sealed the secret it revealed. When the hangars emptied and the turbines took the field, the numbers stayed. They were enough. The climb had happened. Once.